program is presented by Keep the Faith, a nonprofit Catholic lay apostolate devoted to spreading the teachings of Holy Mother Church.
Go tell the world about Mary. Go tell the world about her joy. God the Creator was her little boy, and she'd lull him to sleep with a song for him deep in her heart. Go tell the world about Mary. Go tell the world about her pain. God the Redeemer was her young son slain, and his love she would keep and would ponder it deep in her heart.
Good morning, and welcome to a further installment in our coverage of the early days of the Legion of Mary for the viewers of the world. It's being retold for us by Brother Frank Duff in an informal way so that we can capture the flavor and the atmosphere of those early times. In conversation last night, I was told something about Mr. Duff that he may not want to admit, but I was told that in the early times of his solo work, before the Legion even began, he was called the local madman of Dublin, and I'm just wondering if you're aware of that reputation and how it came about.
Well, I wouldn't say that had any particular currency, because my behavior was not of an eccentric character, and I don't know how I could have that quality imputed to me, but it awakens a thought in me, which was that when I started my picketing at 6.5 Whitefriars Street, I carried my rosary beads, and during the intervals between customers, I used to endeavor to say a few prayers. And I was thus engaged one time when a very lofty personage brought a group of girls out from the church and pointed down to me and said, "That is our local madman." So one of the girls, Emma Colgan, who was not at that time in the Legion, but subsequently came into it, was a tremendous member, said to him, "Ah," she said, "there's method in his madness. You'll find that he'll shut down the place."
And that's exactly what happened.
Which happened.
That's marvelous.
Yeah.
Well, there you are. Well, we certainly know that that's the, there's no eccentricity in your history.
Well, of course, that was at the time, that particular episode that we have been recounting took place at the time when I was picketing and when Gabbett had departed for England.
Oh, yes. You know, that's a point. We wanted to finish that story today from the past interview. What actually happened to Joe Gabbett? And
Oh, yes. Well, if we're attempting any sort of continuation of the previous talk, I think that terminated on the note that Gabbett and I were visiting the Grim enclosure up in Portobello Barracks.
That's right.
And Gabbett was, at that time, a man of overwhelming apostolicity. And he wasn't content with the work behind the iron bars of the said enclosure, but his vision looked out over the whole big barrack, which held at that time 2,000 men of the Lancashire Fusiliers. And he bade me to follow him. And I did me. That characterized my attitude towards Gabbett. And so we went off out, and without leave or license or anything else, we entered one of the barrack rooms. The men had had their dinner at this particular hour, and they had a wait of some duration, and then they were let out into the city, free for the rest of that day. And so the men would be sitting around, mostly at the ends of the barrack room where the fires were. And he came in, and he had a very powerful, deep voice. And he'd say, "Will the overseas please come up around me?" And after a bit of hesitation, because they were very perplexed at this strange pair wandering in, men would come up, a group of men would come up from each end and array themselves around, and Gabbett would give them a lovely little talk about the fact, which presumably they already realized, that they were in peril. And he then urged them to put their house into order and be very assiduous in regard to devotion to Our Lady, and he produced the scapular medal, the bronze scapular medal, which just before this time, and as a war measure, the Pope had authorized. And these medals were offered and easy to the soldiers and eagerly accepted. That particular work became very important and always followed our work inside the grim enclosure. We went out after the latter, and we went for the barracks in general. And in this we were greatly assisted by the regimental sergeant major, a man called Baxter, who was a convert. And he realized that our mission required a little supporting. That would be the nature of men to say, "Who are these fellows coming?" And he used to make a point whenever he saw us on the barrack square to come down and chat with us. And this was a hallmark. That meant that when the sergeant major approved of us, we were okay.
Right.
And we used to make appointments with the men who wanted to go to confession. We would be waiting outside the barrack at 7 o'clock that evening. And on one historic occasion, 70 men turned up.
Is that right?
We hastily telephoned out to Milltown Park, one of the Jesuits' houses here, to have all men standing by in readiness. And we marched out along with the soldiers. They had military formation. And we had the priests of the place busy the whole evening. That was an astounding event.
Yeah.
Though all this then was terminated by Gabbett's departure for England, for Aldershot. And he vanished from that year, which was 1916, until 1918 when the war came to an end. And he came back then, but a different man.
Oh.
A different man. The fire was extinguished, largely. And he had got the habit of tippling a bit.
Oh, I see. Oh,
Sometimes too much. And a new chapter then ensued, which has proved its own great importance in the Legion. And leads me a little further along the road than I had contemplated, because I was talking to two noble figures, Mr. Lawler, the head of the Vincent de Paul Society, and Frank Sweeney, also of that society, and I was telling them about this tragedy. And they said, bring him down to Mount Mallory. Mount Mallory is the celebrated Cistercian abbey, the scene of some visits by Sister Flanagan.
Oh, I see.
It was a place where she realized the ambition of her ambition of being ennobled. And well, now Mount Mallory has entered in quite a big way to the history of the Legion. But its beginning was that visit. I was extensively read in the lore of the Cistercians. I had a great devotion to St. Bernard, and I knew the history of the order very well. And it had a frightening effect on me, because they were so very stiff, so very penitential at the time. But in any case, I brought Gabbett down to Mallory, and that visit, which became an annual visit, I've never missed it in a single year since that year,
right?
which was 1919.
Isn't that remarkable?
1919. And it was there I discovered that book, To Concilio, which was the key that opened up to Montfort to me.
Yes.
It was there in that monastery. And Gabbett became as enthusiastic about it as I was, and along with me paid another visit, and then by himself frequently. And I brought him into the St. Vincent de Paul Society at that time. I think he had repudiated, and but no further. He never came into the Legion, for instance.
No.
I would have had no trouble, of course, in bringing him into that, probably in the capacity of a tribune.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, so perhaps departs Gabbett from our organizational life. And now about, you were asking about Sancta Maria and Bentley Place.
And the early, that period within the Legion's
Well, you'd have to give me an indication in regard to that, because the whole lead up to Sancta Maria is an extensive tale in itself.
Yes. Does it coincide? That's fine.
Yes.
It coincides with the development of the Legion anyway, I would suppose.
Well, if we go on, say, Sancta Maria was 1922. And in other words, it was about 8 or 9 months after the beginning meeting of the Legion. Yeah. The Legion began in September and Sancta Maria began in July. In other words, you had the extraordinary swing from work that is the simplest of all work, perhaps, that is the visitation of hospitals. You had this terrific swing from that to the most difficult of all work.
Yes.
And the facing up to a very grim sort of business. But, and all that it rather exploded on us. It was another of these things that I would regard as a great honor, that the thinking is done not by ourselves, but by the Queen of Heaven. She knows what's good for us, but sometimes very hurtful. And she leads us along. And that's what took place in the case of Sancta Maria. Because prior to that time, I had become very interested in this question of the street girl. And I felt that something should be done about her. See, there was no provision at that time at all for that problem. In as much as there were 4 what they call Good Shepherd homes in Dublin, run by religious orders, but they remained there in their sight, and they received every girl who would offer herself, but they had no mechanism for going out to search. And that was very serious. And also the wildest rumors existed about that type of girl. They were regarded as models of appalling depravity and tough beyond power to deal with them. So my mind centred on the idea of opening up a very low-class lodging house, which would tempt them in by cheap rates, and put up with the fact that they were leading this life, and put a couple of saints in charge of who'd put up with everything and use such opportunities as came their way of moving the girls.
Very interesting idea.
That was the plan. So again, this extraordinary process of being led along. Because at that time I got a letter from the Reverend Mother of the Baldoyle Convent and Sisters of Charity of Baldoyle, and she said that she had 2 ladies staying out in the guest house attached to their place, and that these ladies were of the highest quality and wanted to do social work. Would I mind seeing them and helping them? I wrote back making an appointment for 1 o'clock on a Saturday, which was the hour I was released on my half day from my place of work. And I met the 2 of them. I had seen them before, and I realized that they were people of great holiness. One of them was Miss Plunkett. Miss Plunkett was over 6 feet high.
Oh.
And her father had been the leader of the Irish Bar. Right. She was what you'd have to regard as a veritable saint. The other was Miss Scratton. And Miss Scratton had a history. Her father was Thomas Scratton, a clergyman of the Church of England, who fell under the influence of Cardinal Newman and came into the church. And he accompanied Newman over here to Dublin to found the Catholic University here. And by, of course, seems to be a coincidence beyond parallel, would appear to have stayed in 76 Hawkwood Street when they came to Dublin.
Isn't that right?
Which was subsequently our hospital.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
And the signs of their occupancy were there still evident. So he was a married man, of course, as a clergyman, and she was one of his daughters. And of course, she was living on in Ireland. So these were the two who came to me, and I gave them the works in the way of, they had an amazing scheme of their own in mind, which I proceeded to demolish with the bat-flags. It was that they would open a restaurant in Dublin.
A restaurant?
Yeah. And work it with voluntary labour, including themselves, and that the profits of this were all to go towards the Columban sisters who were just at that time being started. So that represented certainly a heroic, but rather, as I saw it, a not so profitable use of their services. And I put before them as counterpoise my low-down lodging house. Well, if you had suggested to them that I should, it would be a help to souls to jump down Vesuvius, they'd have done it.
Yes.
I never saw it. There was this utter devotion. And they agreed that if such an institution were presented to them, that they count on them. But in the meantime, they were to join the Legion.
Good.
And in order to bring them in, we started Presidium number 2.
Is that so? Number 2.
Presidium number 2.
Now, that brings, just before we go on to the number 2, I was wondering if there's anything between 1919 and the retreat at the monastery and this period that we're describing now, the idea of the beginning of the Legion and so forth. Is there anything that would tie that together?
During all that time, preparatory to the coming of the actual Legion, that preliminary association was in full operation. You must remember that.
Mercy, yeah.
That began in 1917, and we were working away in the pattern of the Legion with the monthly meeting, and it was that meeting that quite suddenly transformed itself into the real article as the result of our session on the True Devotion. But there was no hiatus between any of these dates, because it was a state of hectic evolution the whole time. Hectic. Now you come along to we set up the second Presidium, and that second Presidium met in the room behind the one in which number 1 was meeting, and I was going to attend that too every week. But among Father Creedon had but recently come to Francis Street from the country, and he was, his quality became immediately manifest. And he and I became, I got Father Creedon, Father Torn, and I became a sort of trinity. And we talked over our plans a great deal. And I spent a certain amount of my time late at night, when the ordinary activities would be over in the presbytery, with those two great priests. Now, I told Father Creedon about my notions about this low-down lodging house, and I told him about this Mrs. Slicker's lodging house in Chancery Lane, where there were 30 girls, and where I had entered one evening on the door-to-door principle. I was working on my own.
Going door
and
to door
I went,
you're going door to door on one of your projects?
This was not VDP work.
No.
It was development from it.
Yeah.
But I came in this particular evening into this place, and I found myself in the midst of these 30 girls who were more or less getting themselves ready to go out onto the streets.
Oh,
well, I was utterly unprepared. And the only thought that came to my mind was, my goodness, if the Vincent de Paul Society hears about my being in here, I'd be fired out. Because there'd be no use my saying, oh, I was going in my private capacity. The VDP at that time was terrified of the men getting into any trouble with women.
Oh,
and here was I going into one of these places. Well, I was so astonished, so disorientated, that without a word, we could hardly imagine it. I backed out of the place. I had only that one thought in my mind. And though I told all these things to Father Creedon, and in the month of June of that year, the very celebrated figure, Father Ignatius Gibney, the Passionist, was giving a retreat to the women of the Francis Street parish. And Father Creedon brought him one day down to Mrs. Slicker's lodging house, just in the evening time, that before the evening devotions, and just at probably the very same time that I had stumbled into the place. And the two of them gathered the girls together in the big common room and spoke to them gently along spiritual lines. And the result of this was extraordinary. You'll understand I wasn't there. The result of this was extraordinary. The girls all began to weep and to protest that they hated their life. But what could they do? Nobody would touch them. Nobody would employ them. A simple matter for them, they had to live. And at this stage, Father Creedon made a dramatic offer. He said to the proprietors of the place that he would pay her an agreed sum for her maintenance of the girls until further notice. And they were, on the other hand, to promise that they would not go out on the streets during that period. Although that agreement was come to, and Father Creedon came straight up from that particular business to me and told me what had happened. And I at once summoned a meeting for that night. And to that meeting we brought Father Creedon, of course, Father Tor, Father Robinson, another very distinguished figure, and I brought up from the Presidium number 2, I brought up these two ladies. And we spent a fair time looking at that incredible situation. What on earth are we going to do? Oh yes, I should have mentioned a very important name, Father Duff. He was a Jesuit, and he had opened the Rathfarnham Retreat House for Men. Now, Father Duff believed in the enclosed retreat. He believed it would break your broken limbs, nearly. I never saw such a conviction as he had about the value of a weekend retreat. At that particular time, I partially shared his enthusiasm, which has diminished later. But in any case, he was one of those brought. And we thought over a lot of things, but the only one that seemed to have promise in it was Father Duff's suggestion that we gather them together and give them a retreat, 3-day retreat. And he volunteered to give the retreat himself, as he said he'd give them hellfire, and that this might incite a number of them to go into the Magdalene asylums, which existed. That thus far, and thus far only, did our thoughts reach out at that particular meeting. But we came to the decision that the following day, Father Duff and Miss Plunkett would go around the convents of Dublin trying to secure one of them to house that retreat.
Yes.
And that we would meet again the next evening to find what had happened. And the following evening we came together again, and Father Duff and Miss Plunkett gave us an account of their day's work, which had been a very arduous one. They had gone through a number of the Dublin convents, finding failure in every one, because the reaction of the nuns to the idea of housing these 30 lassies was quite a reaction. No, they had no facilities for such a thing. It sounded awful at the time. And they registered a total failure in all their Dublin city movements. And in this moment of darkness, Miss Plunkett said, let's go out to Baldoyle and see Mother Angela Welch, who was the person who had written to me about the two ladies. So they went off out there. It's about 7 miles from the city. And they were received very cordially by that wonderful person. And she full of sympathy, full of anxiety to help. And they had premises all right, and plenty of them, and she wanted to do it. So in the end, he said, I'll have to obtain the permission of our Mother General. And she went to the telephone and she described what was at stake. The Mother General listened patiently enough and then said firmly, no.
Oh, boy.
But that no was interrupted in the saying. That is, it never reached Mother Walsh. At that moment, our own troubles were going on. And I mean national troubles, and that wire was cut.
Oh, the phone wires were cut.
The phone wire
Is that so?
was cut. And Mother Walsh worked might and main to get communication. Communication when there was none. And then she had these people waiting, and she had to give an answer. And she judged that she was in the position of being able to make her decision herself. And she said yes.
That's nice.
So they came back to us, and that was a wonderful thing. At least if we could induce the girls to consent, at least that was going to carry us along for a few days. And that to gain even an hour of time in these circumstances was a triumph. So now that it was a Wednesday evening, and then we agreed that the following morning, a group of us, not all the meeting, but a group of us would go down to Slickers and canvass the girls. It was 11 o'clock the following day. We went down. Father Duvan, Father Creedon, myself and Miss Plunkett. I don't think Miss Scratton was there, which is surprising. I may be wrong. But in any case, we went into the first room, which held 4 girls. And we proceeded to put the proposition before them. And, what was the game? Oh, what was the game? Suspicion was the atmosphere. Some game. So we spent a long time, I'm sure a full half hour, arguing with those 4 girls. And in my own way, I think I had a part in the favourable decision, which they eventually gave. They knew me.
Oh.
I was up and down Chancery Lane before their eyes for several years.
Yes.
They all knew me, and that's helped them to feel that there was nothing terribly sinister. They didn't know any of the others, not even Father Creedon, who had only just come into their lives in the affair of the visitation of the previous few days. But in the end, we had extracted a consent from those 4. And we went out and into room number 2, which probably held a similar number. And the same anguish obtained there, same persuasion. And then we come out and we find that the whole population of number 1 room had ratted.
Oh.
Some prophets of evil were busy among them, and this is a plot on the part of the government. to lock you up.
Yeah.
Because you must remember, a new government had just come into possession, the native Irish government. And, this terrible, we had to go back to number 1 now and renew all the business. Then we come out with number 2 had rotted. And then eventually we go on to room 3 and 4 and the rest. And we had got a consent from everybody by about 5 o'clock. Now it was an ordeal.
Oh, I can imagine.
At that. I suppose it must have been, well, 4:30 when we finally succeeded, and you realize that in the interval we had absolutely nothing to eat, not even a cup of tea. So the others dismissed, and Father Creedon and I went up to what you'd call a stores in Camden Street, Gordon's, and we bought beds and a number of other things necessary to house people. And Father Creighton was buying like a hero. You'd think he had the Bank of Ireland as his bank. And I should have mentioned that the nuns were in a panic about the contact between the girls and their holiday home that they were running up there as one of their activities. They said, as the nun said, if word went out through Dublin that they were entertaining street girls, it would kill both their holiday home and their weekend retreat house. Which they thought. So they were, she arranged that at no point would those different things touch each other. And we'd have to bring beds. They would give us bed linen, which was getting towards the end of its usefulness, and they would make us a present of that take away with us. They wouldn't even use it a second time after the girl.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
So having thus let ourselves in for a debt, I went into my office for the first time that day. And I endeavored to do some work. And I got a ring on the phone from Tom Fallon, who had heard about all these manoeuvres of ours. I suppose they'd gone through Dublin rapidly. And he said that he understood that the Archbishop had been making some caustic comments about the whole business, and I termed it sentimentality. So I couldn't see that, but in any case this has been said, and the next thing I got a ring on the phone from Father Devan. And I mentioned this to Father Devan, and Father Devan was scared that, call off the whole thing, he said. Call off the whole thing. We daren't go on if there's any doubt in the minds of high authority. It's all off at once. So I didn't see the force of letting all our anxiety and work up to date go down the drain like that. And I said that we'd have to decide on that formally. And I arranged for a meeting in Father Tor's room at 8 o'clock. And Father Creedon, Father Tor, Father Robinson, Father Devan, myself, and we did not bring the two ladies because I said they would be terribly dissatisfied. So, Father Devan's fear derived from the fact that a Jesuit had just been transferred to Australia from here for some little thing that the Archbishop disapproved of. Oh. And Father Devan emphatically did not want to go to Australia. So, a languishing debate followed. Not that we would give up. The only one who wanted really to give up was Father Devan. But the remainder was divided into two, which one half thinking that we should go and put the whole thing to the Archbishop, and the other that numbered myself, they didn't see what this was about. If the Archbishop doesn't approve, let him say so. Why should we be going up pleading for a refusal?
Yeah.
What's the harm? So, but then the caution, and especially with priests, you see there, that's the great problem. And finally, it was agreed by the majority that Father Creedon would go to the Archbishop, even at that late hour in the evening, and put the thing before him and get his approbation. So we went up to his own room in the house, and after an unexpectedly short time, he went up to put on his best clothes. And after an unexpectedly short time, he comes down and he says, I became sane, he said, when I went upstairs. He said, why should we court a refusal in that way? If he disapproves, he knows all about it. Now let him send us word, we'll obey him. He said, I have turned completely now against going. And at that stage, that was the final decision.
Yeah, that's fun.
Now, that was Thursday night, and we had made the arrangement with the girls that a bus would be waiting for them at 11 o'clock at Myra House on Friday morning. And we'd go out to Baldoyle, and they would have a 3-day retreat there. And I engaged a bus, not of the modern pattern, because they didn't exist. What existed then were solid-tired vehicles, and no top on them. They were open charabancs, they were called at the time. Yeah. And this had all the colours of the rainbow adorning it. And, but this would be at 11 o'clock. And at this, oh yes, I should have mentioned that in the evenings debate among the priests and myself, we had agreed, all of us had agreed, that Father Devan regarded himself as being in a difficult position, and that we would release him from his undertaking to give the retreat, and at that he was most relieved.
Yes.
So the question arose then, who'd give the retreat? So Father Creedon and Father Shore said, well, we'll make a festival ourselves if we can't get any regular retreat giver. So that was that. But then when looking around for a possible retreat giver, the name of Father Philip Murphy, OFM, was suggested. He was more or less recently ordained Franciscan. He was stationed in that big church on the Quays, what they call Adam and Eve's. And he had got a lot of fame in Dublin. He was giving a retreat in that church at the time of the coming Grand National. And he had tipped as the winner Sergeant Murphy, which was an Irish contender in the race. And Sergeant Murphy romped home at big odds. And this enriched the population of Dublin, who had all put their last dollar on Sergeant Murphy. And it spread for the Phillips fame throughout the city. And he came into our mouths for this reason. And I was then told that in the early morning of the following day, that is the fateful Friday, I was to go down and put the proposition to him. The following morning, immediately after Mass, I went in to see him, sent for him, and this St. Anthony-like figure came into me. Lovely person. And I told him what had happened, and I asked him would he give the retreat. I would love to, he said. In fact, you can assume that I will. Of course, I have to get the provincial's permission. Oh, that was a blow to the heart. Because, you know, so often obstacles come from the Pope. Oh, he said, you see my thing, you needn't, he'll give it with joy. So we were all staged for the thing. I raced home then, had something to eat, and then I ambled down to Chancery Lane. And when, of course, when I was coming down, you must not think that I was in any mood of optimism, because I was saying to myself, now the inciters of doubts have had nearly 24 hours with the girls. Will one turn up? But that you could not have any hope. But when I came down into a place called Golden Lane, off which Chancery Lane is, the place was packed with people. So it was evident that something sensational was taking place. So I pushed my way through the crowd, and there were all our girls ready, standing around the street, each with a suitcase. So I pushed forward and I said to them, look, don't be creating excitement, get moving now up to Myra House. And I got them moving, and a river of humanity flowed along with them. And when we got up to Francis Street, there was a contrary river flowing in on that place. But, and there, a few minutes later, arrived the gaudy char-a-bang. And we went into Myra House, and the three ladies, another lady had agreed to go on the retreat with Miss Plunkett and Miss Grattan, and we were all assembled. Well, after trying to recover from this unutterably happy shock,
Yes.
we proceeded to shepherd them out into the bus, and we were able to count 23 out of the 30.
Is that right?
Then the three ladies, and I got into the front box along with two drivers. And then we started off right down to the quays. And the bus crawled along at a couple of miles an hour, this being caused by the packed street. The whole thing had created an immense sensation. And we got down then onto the quays and turned to the right, and down the this side of the quay, the other side of the quays. And we came to the forecourts, that big building down there, which was half ruined by the bombardment of the previous week.
Oh.
And there was a tremendous mob of soldiers there with grappling irons, pulling down some of the tottering walls. And the bus stopped there, and I got out and I ran down to Adam and Eve's. Because we don't know whether we have a retreat cover. And the moment I left, a panic ensued in the bus, and there they think, the soldiers are going to fire on us. Excited minds. Yeah. I went in and asked for Father Philip, and he came in a second, and he said, I've got the permission all right. And he came out and he looked up at the bus. And he said, I'd dearly love to go with you in that thing. But he said, there's no use challenging public opinion too much. And he said, follow it by bus. Train, as was at the time. But I returned, and on my return, still the panic. Yeah. And then we started off. It was a very beautiful day. And they sang good all the way out to Baldoyle. We arrived at Baldoyle, and shortly after we arrived, Gordon's van with the beds arrived.
Oh, is that so? Yeah.
And I helped the van man to carry in the beds. The ladies came and decked them out with bedding. And there we were staged for the first retreat. So Father Philip arrived just then too. And he was going to give the first lecture before they would have their first meal. And he gathered them all around him and he said, have any of you ever made an enclosed retreat? No, not one of them ever had. So I'll tell you what you're supposed to do. And he gave them a little account. And then he said, normally silence is a part of an enclosed retreat. I said, you're all in a disturbed state. And I'm not going to ask you to keep silence, so you can talk away as much as you like. And he said, I understand that two of you do not belong to the Catholic Church. And you might prefer to wander around outside during the lectures. So one girl spoke up, Lucy Jones, spoke up and she said, no, Father, she says, I have come along with my pals and I'm going to go through everything with them. And the other girl said, that goes for me too, Father.
Isn't that nice? And
they attended everything. And before the retreat was finished, they had given in their names as candidates for the church.
Isn't that wonderful?
Well, those days were the most thrilling experience that could ever be imagined. I was in a most extraordinary position which could only have arisen as a direct intervention by heaven. I was my own master. When the new government had come into being, it had resulted in my being given a position for the moment of independence. Oh. I was only dependent on a minister.
Yes.
I had no books to sign on coming in or going out.
Very good.
And for days I wouldn't go near the office at all. So there was no problem over that.
Isn't it remarkable?
And I attended all the lectures. And Father Philip proved to be a genuine angel from heaven. So the whole thing went through without any hitches at all. And we had a little room put at our disposal as a headquarters room. And into this we went frequently to iron out the problems. The big problem being, where are we going to go on Monday?
Okay. Well, I think that is a perfect question to end this little installment on, and we certainly invite our viewers to join us again when we again have the pleasure of recalling the early days of the Legion with Mr. Frank Duff.
Go tell the world about Mary. Go tell the world about her place, Mother of Christ in the whole human race, and his life she will keep